Oh, great. Thanks for doing that, Erin. Um,
Absolutely.
well, hello, everybody. This is our second math chat session. My name is Kate Wechter. I am a program administrator in the Office of Academic Support at DPI. Um, Today we have Erin Lacina. She's going to present on the priority standards and proficiency scales for math for K-12 North Dakota. So I will let her kind of introduce herself and take it away.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and to everyone who will be watching this at a later time. Glad to have you here. I'm the Director of Professional Learning and Operations at the NESC. That's the Northeast Education Services Cooperative based out of Devils Lake, one of our 7 regional education associations in the state. But another role that I get to play within North Dakota is that of project director for North Dakota standards-based learning. And so that's more of the role that I come to you with today, getting to talk about priority standards and proficiency scales, the role of getting to share all of the good things of standards-based learning with you today. Definitely a passion project of mine and something that's so exciting to get to take part in with schools across the state. And so I'll go back to sharing the presentation. Okay, Kate, can you see the first slide again? Good. Okay, wonderful. Okay. Here we are. Okay, so North Dakota standards-based learning. I just want to provide a little context for this before I go into the particulars of priority standards and proficiency scales, because that really does lead up to the bigger picture of standards-based learning practices and where you get to see some of that impact around that work. And so with North Dakota standards-based learning, this is the work that we do to support schools in the adoption of those standards-based learning resources and practices for improved student learning outcomes. It's not just about getting those great resources into play. We never want it to just end with that, of creating some resources that live in a binder on a shelf. We're really about bringing student learning outcomes to fruition within our schools and seeing that classroom and that student level impact. We believe in equitable resources and learning opportunities for students and educators across North Dakota. We know that for a number of years, some of our larger school systems within the state have been able to take on some of this work of priority standards and proficiency scales within their systems because they have the benefit of teacher teams, multiple teachers across a department or across a grade level, or maybe they even have curriculum coordinators and instructional coaches within their school systems to help lead some of this work, because it very much is resource heavy to take on the task of identifying priority standards and developing proficiency scales to build those tier 1 supports. But we know that's not a gift that all school systems within the state have. If you come from a small and rural school, you're probably looking at more of the situation of one teacher per grade level, or even one teacher that makes up a so-called department within the secondary system. And so that is a huge lift for schools. And so what we're trying to do with North Dakota standards-based learning is really bring equity to all of our systems across the state by helping them lift this load. And so we're passionate about high quality curriculum instruction and assessment practices. And we want to leverage that work by providing all schools with the resources to build those foundations. So this work is being led by 3 of our REAs within the state that make up North Dakota standards-based learning. We have the CREA based out of the Bismarck, Mandan, Minot area. We have the NESC, as I referenced where I am from, out of the Devils Lake area, and we have the SEEC out of the Fargo area. We have been working together to develop these resources and try to lift up professional learning and standards-based learning across the state, formally together since about 2017. And we just keep we feel getting better, getting stronger, building momentum since that time. And we have done this work in partnership with the Department of Public Instruction as well since that time. And we're lucky to be supported by NDDPI to continue to have the resources to build supports to keep moving forward in coordination with our North Dakota content standards, and to be able to lift this up against other work that's happening in the state, coordinate that work, align those supports, and continue to get out to our schools and build awareness. So who we do this work for? Of course, we do this work for our teachers, for our leaders, for all of our educators within the system. We recognize the need for the tier 1 supports in schools. And so we want to support them by helping to gain focused instructional time, clear learning progressions, and the aligned curricula instruction and assessments. And I'll get into that more within just a little bit here. But we also do this work for our students. We recognize the importance of clear learning progressions, ownership of the learning, and actionable feedback. And that really comes out through the proficiency scales that we're going to be talking about today. That's truly where the magic happens, the conferencing around those learning progressions that become so clear, so evident through the proficiency scales. And we do this work through our families, through those who support our students. So through standards-based learning, we can achieve refined communications of our learning expectations and enhanced grading and reporting of our K-12 content standards. So how do we do this? We go about this work through North Dakota standards-based learning a few different ways. One is through resources and through development and distribution of those resources. So those resources include North Dakota priority standards, our proficiency scales, the aligned tools with those scales. We also developed an implementation guide last year. We'll be coming out within the year here with implementation rubrics, other aligned documents, and we put out an NDSBL newsletter as well, just keeping everybody abreast of related resources out there in the field that come from other partners around North Dakota standards-based learning, important key readings, why we're doing what we're doing, what other schools in the state might be doing as a result of the work, just to keep everybody abreast of the latest news and other supports available. We also provide professional learning. We design the professional learning, or we facilitate what we have designed, of course, or we facilitate in cooperation with partners out in the field. We put on workshops, synchronous and virtual offerings, on-demand sessions, and a lot of customized PD out within our schools too. We provide collaborative structures through our work, and these are regional or even state structures. These include educator work groups or support of standards implementation and resource development sessions, and leadership sessions and structures as well to keep the work moving forward. So when we think about standards-based learning, or when you think about this session around priority standards and proficiency skills and how it may relate to your work at home, it's important to start by thinking about those connections and really get grounded in where the entry point may be into that conversation with a colleague, or just into that next small step that then turns into really important momentum. So we can think about school improvement. The work of the foundations in curriculum instruction and assessment that are closely tied to priority standards and proficiency skills can be seen within many school improvement efforts. They can be found within the performance standards of Cognia. It can be related to the improvement work within TSI and CSI that some of our schools are doing within the state. You'll find it embedded within the Tier 1 support efforts of NDMTSS. And you can also find it within leading and lagging indicators of HRS, that's high reliability schools that some of our North Dakota schools are engaged in across the state. We also have some schools related or engaged in the work with personalized learning and standards-based grading and reporting, or standards-based practices are often a wonderful entry point into that personalized learning work as well. Of course, priority standards and proficiency scales are related to content standards. That's That's where we start to identify our priority standards. And today I'll show what that process looks like. So it's in support of our North Dakota content standards. With that foundation of content standards, then we can develop highly effective and evidence-based curriculum and instruction practices, which then help us develop reliable, fair, high quality assessment, grading, and reporting practices. That becomes part of a larger instructional planning cycle. We can think about that backwards design process where when we have a clear picture of the essential standards that we most need to address within any given year or any given course, we can then work backwards from that summative assessment plan to the explicit instruction and formative checks that we need to put in place to then know where our students are within that cycle and where we need them to be and how we may need to then customize our instruction and provide feedback to make sure that we get all students to that proficiency point within those most essential content pieces by the end of that instructional cycle. So you can see how that curriculum and instruction and assessment just wraps right in. And we know that every school out there is already doing curriculum and instruction and assessment. So why don't we just think about how we can refine that and help all students and help all teachers actually through this process of working with priority standards and proficiency scales, and possibly just achieve even greater impact, even greater learning for our students. So let's think big, and then we'll get down even tighter again to the priority standards and proficiency scales. So starting with the big picture, what is standards-based learning? Standards-based learning is a systematic approach to the planning and implementation of high-quality curriculum instruction and assessment. These practices meet the needs of students, educators, and families by promoting greater levels of clarity, communication, consistency, and effectiveness in teaching and learning. Using prioritized North Dakota content standards, learning time is maximized while learning progress is measured through the scaffolded demonstration of competency through the learning process. Standards-based learning is rooted in instructional research and serves to create a guaranteed and viable curriculum for all North Dakota students. Now that's our statement, North Dakota Standards-Based Learning, our team. That's our statement of what is standards-based learning to us. That's a lot. Let's boil that down a little bit. If we look at the first piece, it's important to understand that this is a systematic approach. This is developing a system. It's not grabbing onto one instructional practice. It's really building the system of curriculum and instruction and assessment. And your priority standards and your proficiency scales will be that foundation from which then we develop all of those pieces together. What's really exciting about this, just to go back about our why, is that this supports students, educators, and families. And in doing so, how we do so is that clarity piece. That clarity is huge. The teachers, the educators need that clarity first and foremost. Thinking about a teacher who gets a set of the content standards for, say, mathematics or English language arts, or if they're an elementary teacher, they get both of those, not to mention their science and their social studies and their health and all of the other subjects that they teach. Or if you think about a teacher in a small school who teaches all the grade levels 7 through 12, all of those math courses within the secondary level. Think about all of those standards that they are responsible for, all of the courses throughout the day. They need clarity. They need clarity in what is most essential to teach. What is most essential for this student by the end of the year, and then beyond that, by the end of their high school career, in order to be successful. And then how do we communicate that so that the students know what they need to do next to continue in their learning and meet proficiency, and how we communicate that clarity to the family so that they know how to support their learners. And then wouldn't it be beautiful if we had consistency from classroom to classroom in a school where there was more than one second grade teacher? If all of those second grade teachers were consistently implementing those essential standards, and consistency that if every single year a teacher in that school system was actually able to make it through that most essential list of content standards before time ran out. And we could actually guarantee to our students and families that they would have that curriculum to a level of understanding that they needed to be successful before time ran out. That's exciting. That's what we want to be able to promise them. And what we're putting forth here with priority standards and proficiency scales, this is rooted in instructional research. There is tremendous research behind this work. This is worth our time. So here's our promise from North Dakota Standards-Based Learning. With this work, we promise a guaranteed curriculum that provides equitable access to essential knowledge and skills. This we have through our North Dakota state content standards. The writers of our state content standards have guaranteed a sequence of content and knowledge, of content of knowledge skills that is aligned horizontally and vertically. My computer is advancing without me, I apologize. So that is already aligned. That is our guaranteed curriculum. We have those learning targets in place. Now, what we need is the viability. We need to work at this piece, and this is where our priority standards are going to get us to. We need content standards identified to the point that we can actually teach that content to a level of understanding in the time available. That's where we fall short a little bit. We know that our time is precious and we don't have enough time to teach every content standard within a grade level or course within any given year to the level of understanding that we truly need. There are too many content standards, unfortunately, to be able to do that to the extent that would be needed to get to a level of understanding. And I also know that the writers of our content standards do not intend for every single standard to be taught to an equal level of understanding. Some standards just carry more weight. Some standards are more essential than others for a student's long-term success, and that's scaffolding from one year to the next or one course to the next. So we've got the guaranteed curriculum. Now let's work to the viable curriculum. Research says 12 to 20 priority learning goals per grade level or content area is most effective for student success. Now that 12 to 20 priority learning goals is for a grade level or content area within a year. So if we're talking about a secondary level course, that's a year-long course, not a semester course, a year-long course. And the research that we rely upon for our work is Marzano Resources research. They really lead the field in this work. So we're going to focus on 12 to 20 priority learning goals per grade level or year-long course. And we want to teach those 12 to 20, what we call priority standards, to a level of understanding. So with these priority standards, this is what we would expect. This is what we want to work towards. We want to introduce and teach those as new knowledge. We want to provide practice and deepening activities. We want to assess these, and that would include both formative and summative assessment. Provide the interventions and extensions as necessary, and we may need to reassess if our students aren't showing proficiency on that summative assessment. So to say it really simply, for any of our priority standards, for all of our priority standards, we want to teach, assess, if we need to, reteach, and reassess. We would enrich for those who were proficient on our initial summative assessment, and we're also going to report to parents. Those are our priority standards. This is going to take up the majority of our instructional time within our year-long course or that grade level. Our priority standards will take our instructional focus and the majority of our instructional time. So what happens to the other standards? Because if we're only having 12 to 20 as priority, according to the research, we do know there are a significant number of other standards in our North Dakota content standards documents that would not be identified as priority. I want to send the message loud and clear that we do still teach those other standards. We're still responsible to those other standards. We would be creating significant gaps in a student's learning progression over the years if we just ignored those standards. So we do still teach those standards. We're not saying those are not important. However, they are not as important. They receive lesser time and instruction. They would receive maybe only formative checks. We would think of those as supporting standards. You know, where teachers often kind of joke about having to just cover their standards because of the number of standards and the limited instructional time you have. We're not going to just cover priority standards. With the other standards, however, those you may, in a sense, cover because you're checking with your students to see to what extent do they have it as a necessary step as the ladder up to proficiency of the priority standard. So you may teach those, but move on. We're not going to reteach and reteach, reassess, make sure everybody is at proficiency, and spend too much instructional time on those. Those are the ladder up, the support to the other priority standards. They would be aligned to the priority standards. So in other language that you may be familiar with, you know, the need to know versus the nice to know kinds of framework there. When we think about our priority standards, those are the need to know. Then when you think of all of your other standards as supporting standards, that's where you would relate those, align those to your priority standards as either the important to know or nice to know according to how crucial they are in that ladder up to proficiency and how much instructional time each of those would get in support of that learning progression. So that work helps us align our intended curriculum with our implemented curriculum. So our intended curriculum are our content standards. And in this case, what we really want happening in our classrooms with that intended curriculum are our priority standards. That's what we most intend for teachers to teach, are those priority standards. That's where we want the instructional time to be focused. Now, the implemented curriculum, we have a better chance of that happening now, that is what's actually getting implemented in the classroom, because now it's only 12 to 20 standards within that grade level or within that year-long course versus maybe 50 some standards in a set of content standards in the original document. Because now we have instructional focus, and now we can set a very intentional pacing guide for the year based on those priority standards with the supporting ones built in. And now we can really work with our curricular resources in an intentional way aligned to those priority standards. And now we know how to best use our students' time and feedback cycles. And now we can really take a look at our summative assessment to determine how it best aligns with our priority standards, to then determine Was that curriculum attained? To what extent did what we teach actually get learned by our students? How well is our intended, our implemented, and our attained curriculum aligned? Because that's the end goal, is that we have an attained curriculum our students are learning. So how did our North Dakota Standards-Based Learning Group prioritize our standards? We have a process that we use for both math and English language arts. And so we want to make sure that our educators across the state who are using these standards also understand how they came to be. We have a set of criteria for priority that came recommended from Marzano Resources. This is a process that they use with educators across the world to establish lists of prioritized standards. And the 5 criteria are endurance, leverage, readiness, assessment, and teacher judgment. So I'll let you just scan this list for a moment. So each time that we work with an original list of content standards that we want to then prioritize to determine the most essential 12 to 20 standards per grade level or content area or course, we work with these criteria. So our process is that we brought together educators from across North Dakota. So when thinking about building a strong representation of educators, we brought together through an application process representatives from small schools, large schools, private, public, tribal. We also brought representatives from higher education, regional education associations. We also had representatives listen in from the Department of Public Instruction. We brought very diverse teams together through this process. We had a math team and an ELA team, and every grade span was a small group, a small working team, addressing like K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, and 11, 12 across both math and ELA. And so while they worked within a single grade level, so while they worked within kindergarten set of documents and first grade and second grade set of documents, and they aligned horizontally and made those decisions within a single grade level, they also then went back and worked with vertical progressions within their own grade span. So then they worked to make sure that decisions were made in a fashion that supported a K2 span, and the 3-5 worked on their vertical progression. In addition, then we also worked across vertical progressions, making sure that we had decisions that really supported from K-12. Further, then we got feedback from the writers of the North Dakota Content Standards documents. So once our preliminary decisions were made about our selection of the priority standards in K-12 math and K-12 ELA, we put those back to the writers of the original 2023 draft of the North Dakota Content Standards and asked for their feedback about their support of our selection, if they had any questions about what was selected, and if they had any feedback for additional prioritized standards that they felt should be added to the list then. And we also brought in an advisory group for math and an advisory group for ELA for final review of the horizontal and the vertical decisions, as well as just any refinement of language from vocabulary to the actual learning progressions within there as well. So we feel we've been quite thorough in the work, and we hope that schools are happy with the resources that have been put forth. So this is a snapshot of what this process looks like. You see the 5 criteria across the top here: endurance, leverage, etc. Down the left-hand side, you can see this is a snapshot from 6th grade math. So what you would see down the left-hand side of this spreadsheet is every sixth grade math standard from the original content standards document entered into this spreadsheet. So the grades 6 through 8 math team would start with the sixth grade standards in this process, and they would read standard 6on.n1, and then they would assess, so to speak, they would rate that standard against endurance, and then a leverage, and then rate it against readiness, et cetera, et cetera. If they felt that this standard, 6on.n1, met the criteria for endurance, they would give it a score of 1 in that cell. Same thing for leverage. It could potentially get a score of 1 all the way across. If it met all criteria, it would have a total score of 5. So any standard could technically score anywhere from a 0 to a 5. And they scored every single standard at every single grade level. Each working group did, all the way K through 5. When a team gets done scoring an entire set of standards, they then re-rank, resort their spreadsheet from high to low. So all standards with a score of 5 then get re-ranked the top all the way down to the bottom. So a sheet would come out looking like this. So here's that sixth grade sheet. And so you can see standards that scored a 5 and met all 5 criteria can get floated to the top, and we can easily see which ones should automatically be considered for priority because they met all 5 criteria. What's very typical, if we think about the research supports 12 to 20 priority standards, we would see standards that scored a 5 make the priority list, and standards that received a score of 4 make the priority list. Then we kind of hit that point where we look at those that scored a 3, and that's where we have to take into consideration a further review and really kind of go back through, should they or shouldn't they, and what's the rationale as far as which ones do or don't make the priority list. And then we really have to get into deeper conversations about the vertical progression with the grade band below and the grade band above to see what makes the most sense and what standards are related down below and above, and which team, which grade level really should be focusing on that concept for priority, what makes the most sense. And so that's how these lists get determined initially until we go into additional layers of vetting for final draft of the priority standards lists. And if you have questions about that, you can drop those in the chat and we can revisit those as we go. So that's the prioritization process. So then we end up with our 12 to 20 priority standards per grade level. From there, we're able to draft proficiency scales for those priority standards. Now, the way we work with that in North Dakota is that we draft a proficiency scale for each priority standard. So if we have 15 priority standards in first grade math, then we will have 15 aligned proficiency scales. It's a 1-for-1. So a proficiency scale is a collection of learning goals organized into progressions of learning for a specific standard or measurement topic. But like I said, in North Dakota, it's for a specific standard. Scales serve 2 purposes. The first is that they help teachers clarify the content and the progression they want learners to grasp. And that progression really comes out within score 2 of the proficiency scale. And a proficiency scale also helps learners to see their pathway for learning and understand where they are in the journey. It helps them to celebrate all of the knowledge and skill targets they have already accomplished and how far they have come. And it helps them to see where they go next as they work their way to proficiency. And if they reach proficiency, that's an even bigger celebration, and it helps them to see how they can go above and beyond and apply and transfer that learning. Sometimes there's confusion about a proficiency scale versus a rubric. And so we like to clarify that language because ours are scales, not rubrics. But rubrics are often used within schools too. So I'll start with a rubric. So a rubric is used to assess a student's progress on a particular assignment or an activity related to a learning goal. So with rubrics, think short term, think small scale. So a rubric might be just one project, one assignment, a smaller moment in time. And they're graded on that one thing according to that rubric and what that expectation was for that assignment, for that one project. Okay. A proficiency scale is going to measure many moments in time. It's going to measure a collection of evidence. It might be for an entire instructional unit and will be the end goal. It's going to be that proficiency expectation at the end of a unit of study, at the end of a collection of evidence. So that's a longer instructional time and multiple moments of assessment over that instructional time. So sometimes people just see that 4, 3, 2, 1 down the side of a proficiency scale and then just automatically associate that with what they know of as a rubric, but it's two separate purposes, even though you may see a similar scoring pattern down the side of the tool. So if we think about the progression of learning within a proficiency scale, this is kind of a good visual to wrap your mind around it and how we think about evidence in that progression in learning. So if we think about that summit on this ski hill, that's our target. That's where we want to get to. On our proficiency scale and on most proficiency scales out there, that's the 3.0 on the scale. And our target, that's our content standard. That's our North Dakota content standard. That's where we want all students to get. This climber right here, that's where the climber wants to get. That's where any climber wants to get. They want to get to that summit. That's the goal. So this is where a learner is currently at, wherever they are on that hill, wherever they are on that climb, you're going to see that evidence behind them. You're going to see that evidence of that fight. You're going to see that evidence of that climb. On a proficiency scale, that evidence of achievement is going to be the activities, the assignments, the formative checks that we have along the way through that instructional unit. But we should have a collection of evidence on the way to the summit, on the way to that target. Where there's still room for improvement, that's where we're going to be providing that feedback. That's where we're going to be motivating. We're still going to be building for that collection of evidence along the way. But that's an important journey for the educator and the student to travel together. And it's the goal that we get all students to the summit. It's not just for some, it's for all. And when we hit the summit, the sky's the limit. That's the 4.0 on the scale. Now, there isn't just one way to soar above. There could be a number of options with the sky's the limit. It's not just must do this or must do that. There could be a number of ways to exceed and soar above. With a proficiency scale, you can think about that as a tool to provide clear guidance for the teacher and what's the most important content. That's the 3.0 on the scale. But it also provides that excellent guidance for the teacher about how to get to that 3.0, because that's the progression, that's the climb along the way, that evidence of learning along the way. And while maybe a really experienced teacher or one who's taught in that same grade level or that same content area for a long time might really know that clearly laid path to the 3.0, for those who don't, or for those who just need a check on what that is, That's our 2.0 on our scale. You're going to see that clear progression of learning leading to the 3.0. Does the child know how to do this? Does the child know how to do that? Do we have this gap filled as they work their way up to the 3.0? Proficiency scales also serve as a framework for high-quality classroom assessment processes. That proficiency scale lays out exactly what we want students to know and be able to do by the end of that instructional unit, what the expectation is for proficiency for all students. And so we know how to design a summative assessment, or we know how to look at the existing summative assessment that's provided in our curricular resources, and we know how to refine that and make that align better if we're not designing it from scratch. And then that 2.0 progression on our scale, we can look at that and create some really great formative checks to know which of our students have those foundational pieces in order to be able to reach the 3.0. And then our proficiency scales also ensure alignment of curriculum, instruction, and feedback. It's a complete roadmap to aligning all of those pieces. If we're doing it in a really great way within our classrooms, the proficiency scales don't just live behind the scenes on a clipboard with the teacher using these tools. They're actually a tool for the student to use, for the teacher and the student to use together as that goal setting tool, as that progress monitoring tool, as a conferencing tool, as a celebration tool. That's where the magic happens with proficiency scales. So the scales can drive student-centered support in a number of ways. Here's an example of one of our math proficiency scales. If you look up in the top left corner, this scale is for standard KNOCC1. So if you crack the code by looking over to the right, it's a kindergarten scale in number and operations, counting and cardinality. It addresses the math attributes of problem solving, connections, reasoning, and proof. Those math attributes come from your North Dakota Content Standards document. They're detailed in that document, and we just transferred them over to the scale to make sure that was really clear for the teacher, just as a reminder to bring those into instruction, bring those into assessment. Look at the green rows right across the center of your scale. 3.0, this is your proficiency expectation in green across the center. The student can count verbally in sequential order by ones and tens to 100, etc., etc. That's what we want all students to be able to do by the end of the year, and this will be the focus of this instructional unit. This is what we will teach, assess, reteach, reassess, enrich for those who master proficiency early, and this is what we would report to parents. This is one of our 12 to 20. Down under 2.0, we have drawn out the essential vocabulary. What our work groups have done for our educators is they have pulled out the words that they feel is absolutely essential for students to know and to use in order to be able to demonstrate proficiency of that content standard. So this is the vocabulary that educators would explicitly teach within their instructional unit. This is the vocabulary they could assess. This is what they would want to actually not just use themselves, but actually expect the students to use within their days. And to the right side of that 2.0 box, this is our Score 2 foundational knowledge and skills. Performs basic processes such as count verbally by ones to 20, etc., etc. There's 3 tasks there, or 3 expectations there. So if all students can demonstrate proficiency of the essential vocab and the 3 basic knowledge and skill targets listed there, they should be able to then reach the proficiency expectation at score 3. We've also provided 2 possibilities within score 4. So if you look at our score 4, it says, in addition to score 3, the student demonstrates in-depth inferences and applications that go beyond what was taught. So this isn't the only way to exceed a score 3 and to go above and beyond transferring that knowledge and applying it in varied situations. But these are two possibilities that kind of get the juices flowing for the educators, get them thinking about ways to move above and beyond. So this is the educator scale. And so for every kindergarten priority standard, there would be one that looks just like this. But in addition to the educator scales, we also created student-friendly scales, ones that the students could use with the teachers to, check it off, interact with it, monitor where they are in their learning. So here's the student-friendly scale. And what you might notice first is it's kind of a mashup of an I can statement with the proficiency expectations of the educator scale. So I can understand essential vocabulary such as, I can count by 1s to 20 out loud. And so the teacher could have a copy of this for every student, and they can actually work together on this. The check boxes are there for the student to actually show what they know. When they can show that, they can actually work with it on the scale, highlight it, cross it off, interact with it. They could show it during a student-led conference, keep it in a math folder, work through all of their priority standards scales. This could be a really powerful tool for them. So it's the exact same content as on the educator scale, just in student-friendly language. In some cases, language was changed to be a little more developmentally appropriate for that grade level, but we didn't alter the expectation in any way. So this is a snapshot of our website where you can find our priority standards and proficiency scales. So ndsbl.org. And so this is the little section from the resources page where we have our math priority standards and scales documents posted. On the left-hand side is the educator scale. On the right-hand side is the student-friendly scales. We're in our final weeks publishing for our scales. And so right now, what is published at this time, almost at the end of November, are the K-5 scales. And an 8th grade educator scale is up if you're watching live today. By the end of November, all of the rest of the math scales will be up. As I said, we're just in our final few days of math final advisory review. And so those will be up by the end of November. But if you click on those, the first couple pages are the table of contents that list all of the priority standards in order. And then those are all hyperlinked to the scales pages as they're listed there. I'll also just mention too, we have the priority standards and proficiency scales for the newest 2023 versions of English language arts. And further, we have proficiency scales for health and essential skills and science and social studies. And soon we will also have music up. We're in final publishing of music as well. So there's many supports there for guaranteed and viable curriculum and high quality curriculum instruction and assessment. And then further on our site, you can also find professional learning supports. We have archived resources from Marzano Resources around priority standards, a full what, why, and how of priority standards, if you need to share some of that out further with your staff. Also on proficiency scales, we have one on high quality assessment. There's a couple of others as well. And then this is where we'll announce to any live workshops coming up. We have more professional learning planned for this coming year yet. We will be starting a leadership series in January, and we're going to run one session per month, January all the way through April, for elementary and secondary leaders around the resources that are available within North Dakota Standards-Based Learning and really how to develop and lead using the resources of priority standards and proficiency scales and build those systems within the school. So more information will be coming out very soon about that leadership series. We're excited about that. And last year we developed an implementation toolkit for those who are interested in picking up to the next step of wherever they may be in their standards-based learning journey. We put together that toolkit to help build that culture, lead some professional learning within their own school systems, evaluate where they may be for next steps. And so that toolkit is available on our website as well if you'd like to dig around in there a little bit. And feel free to always reach out and ask some questions if you're just needing a little guidance with that toolkit and would like to just explore some options. We're happy to do that with you as well. So we want to make sure that we have a little something for everyone there, whether it's an individual educator looking to explore some instructional practices and classroom supports, or it's a full system network looking to take the next step, whether you're brand new to it or you've already got some of these practices in place and you're just looking for some refinement and maybe the next piece of the puzzle. We hope there's something there that turns your head and excites you. So that's what I have to share today, but I'm interested in any questions you guys may have.
This isn't really a question, Erin, but and I don't know if you mentioned this, but the Dr. Phil Warwick videos that you guys also have posted on the website are helpful as well. I know before this position, I was teaching in a middle school, and we referenced your scales and um, priority standards to help kind of develop our own within Mandan Middle School. And at the time, Phil Warwick was in our school helping us with that process. And so he had directed us to those webinars and showed us, it's just, there's so much good information on there, and it's useful, it's relevant. And so I just wanted to point that out too.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's on the NDSBL website under the tab Professional Learning. So besides the priority standards and the proficiency scales, I referenced the high quality assessment one is another one Dr. Warwick does. And then Jan Haig from Marzano Resources has one archived there with us, and it's about using proficiency scales in the classroom. And so it really takes that truly that teacher level lens with implementation, whereas the other proficiency scales video that we have there is like the what, why, how of proficiency scales. Jan gets into the, okay, let's get down to the nitty gritty with them there. Let's talk about the daily use with the scales and getting to that student level impact with them. So we've got a nice little suite of resources there available. And if you go to the website and just hit the video in the request form, fill out the Google form as a North Dakota educator, you'll get free access to those.
Okay, and then Kay just said, thanks, Erin. The 8th grade standards are perfect timing for us. We will be working with an 8th grade teacher on Monday doing coherence mapping for pre-teaching, reteaching, all the skills needed to even gain access into the grade level standard.
Perfect. And we're under our final advisory review of the middle levels and the upper level math just before the end of November. So they'll come hot off the press and onto the website by the end of the month there. So
Great.
Good to know they're being looked at. Thanks, Kay.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? And I'll share this PowerPoint with Kate as well as just another website handout with her to add to the Math Chats file on the Ed Hub. So if you want to share that out with anybody, you'll have that as a reference point to pass along. And never hesitate to reach out. The webs or the email address is shared at the end of the PowerPoint, and that just is a a general NDSBL email address, but it comes delivered right to me so I can answer those questions or can forward them on to anybody else who may be able to help as well. Okay,
Okay, thank you so much, Erin.
you're
That's
welcome.
great.
Okay, glad to share. Hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yep.
Bye.